Hey, man.
Yeah.
I'm so excited to have this interview because we've tried to do this before.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
Circumstances that we couldn't control
Yeah.
came, to stop it. But
Yeah.
I'm really excited for this conversation because I think the first time I met you guys, I was just like, these are guys that deeply care about what they're building, but also
Yeah.
the impact that they have.
Hundreds.
Um, and I want to explore more of that.
Yeah.
Did you always love technology to the level at which you wanted to build something for the world?
It's weird. I was intrigued by it, interested. I don't know whether it was love, but just growing up, especially in the township, I was just one of those kids that even from a television perspective, I was obsessed with Bikamize from Mars. You get the whole tech feel. Love Star Wars. You loved how things work, gadgets. And for me, I just always thought, okay, how do these things work? But I'd say like the first time my eyes really opened up to it and its possibilities, because when it's on TV, it's fine removed. Was when I was like 12 years old. I got a scholarship, which like moved me from my township, and I went to a private school in Joburg.
Mm.
And when I was there, it was the first time I was in a school that had a computer lab, and then there was a library, there were fields. It just had so much, right? But like once you sit in the computer lab and you see what's possible, and you see even the features that are there, I mean, they were mundane back then, but when you see that as a child, you start asking yourself, how do these things work?
Mm.
And then I think the rabbit hole kind of just stuck there, and it's always been in the back of my mind.
How important are environments to how futures are shaped, right? I think like you're talking about coming from the northwest
Yeah.
in a township where maybe technology is not so proliferated to moving to Joburg and having more access.
Yeah.
How important was that for you?
It's, in fact, I can always attribute like the change in my life to that moment at 12 years old, because I was finishing primary school in a no fee paying primary school at home.
Mm.
And what I knew was my environment. And to an extensive degree, I was very happy with that. I was comfortable. I was very okay with going to a secondary school in the very same township.
Mm.
And then all of a sudden, I find myself in this massive school, right, where even the tone, the accent of English is something that you can't even relate with.
Mm.
You see what's out there. And also, like, for a change, I wasn't really the smartest kid, right? Like in my primary school, I was the top performer. Now you're finding other kids, and it was tough adjusting to private school and those kind of environments, but it shaped me, right? It built like my resilience. And then also it made me very competitive, because now all of a sudden you are competing with 10 other guys for how well you do in maths. And like, environments is everything. Even now to this day, I pay attention to like which environments we expose ourselves to. And even with my team, I always say, gents, watch where you go, and then also curate kind of the spaces that you're in, because it does kind of inform whether you cap yourself, or whether you even transcend where you are.
Sure, man. So you in this new environment,
Yeah.
you playing with technology. What was the first thing that you really tried to build?
The thing is, I was never really much of a developer,
Mm.
but I would call myself a designer, right? I would always think about how things work, how you could design a product, how could these things work, So at first, when I was in high school, I didn't really think about designing a tech product. I actually always thought about sketching what I saw. So I love sketching. I'm a doodler. I sketch. I love art. So I
Mm.
would always draw like cartoons and think about how that could be animated. I would always draw cars, biker from Mars, astronauts. I drew a lot, right? That's actually, even to this day, that's where my energy comes. Now, when we start talking about building an actual product, that hits me quite late in life. Actually, it's when I'm in my first professional job, which was at Discovery, and they have a loyalty program called Vitality. And just when I saw how a product can change whether you go to gym 2 times or 3 times or 4 times a
Mm.
week, that for me I found fascinating, because it's not like somebody's waking up and telling you to. It's a product kind of starting to a degree dictate or even help your life. I found that fascinating. And that's when I started like really designing a product that could influence the behavior of kids in my township to potentially maybe get access to the opportunities I got and have like a better life because I could see the gap. That's when I really started.
Sure, man. I think like, that corporate experience is
Yeah.
such a underrated thing for
Yeah.
entrepreneurs, right? And very many entrepreneurs attribute that time they spend at companies for what they eventually start working on, like long term as well. What are the things that you are learning about how technology can dictate behavior, but also how incentives can start to drive how people act on platforms?
Exactly that. I mean, the foundation was discovery, right? It was seeing all of that, seeing how you could monitor. And then I got into a role where I was like a broker relationship manager. So now that's where the brokers are really involved in their clients' lives. And we could see how we could even design how a client could even improve their own livelihood, to the point where they can even optimize their own benefits by even living healthier. And that for me was like what a win-win-win trifecta. That was really interesting. And then I moved over into banking. I joined InvestTech, and it was kind of similar, right? I started at InvestTech, even in the loyalty program side of things. It was called InvestTech Rewards, and it was just seeing how clients behave. We would monitor like visa transactions, and then also like seeing how clients, you could see now travel patterns, shopping patterns, and then the whole team or the product team, you'd have to think about how do we design products that can actually now incentivize the behavior we want to see, be it saving, maybe just maybe. I'll give you a practical example. Instead of just using your points to buy a voucher, what if you use your points at a better rate to make it a transfer into your unit trust? Now all of a sudden you are saving at and you're getting more bang for your buck rather than converting it into a voucher at a mall. And those were the kind of things that I saw, and I just found it so amazing on how, like, once you see what works, people know what's good for them, but they find it difficult to implement it unless you put certain carrots in their lives. And you could start considering life as one big game if you build products around that and you know the kind of behaviors you want to design around.
Sure. So going back to Sync, which was what you tried to build for your guys back home, what was that, and what were you trying to achieve?
So here's the thing, right? Growing up, right, I had a fair amount of friends, but not a lot of friends. And I was quite a nerdy kid, like I was in my primary school top performer. I was very academically orientated. And to a degree, that's what actually led to the scholarship I got, right? And that scholarship is what took me out of that environment. And that's when I saw the value of education. It's very tough to show somebody the value of something vicariously or from a distance. And then what happened is that as I was growing up and I started working professionally, I go home. I visit my parents. They will never leave the place, and I start seeing the state of the township. I start seeing the infrastructure being degraded. I start seeing my childhood friends, unfortunately, not all of them having good fortune in life. That hurts, man. And my thing was, I know I wasn't the smartest kid in that region. I was just the kid that got opportunity at the right time, and my whole thinking was, how do I create something where kids with a similar skill set or with similar interest or the same degree of curiosity can gravitate towards and maybe find a network of other nerds. And then if, let's say, I like maths, physics, and Star Wars, and there are 10 other kids that like that in the township, when you find your tribe, you are less inclined to hang out with the destructive forces. And that was the whole concept behind it, just to say, how do we make sure that the kids that really have potential find a virtual safe environment, and that way they will be saved and maybe they will get exposed to opportunities, because we started posting bursary opportunities and stuff like that on the platform, and then they could have similar, if not better, opportunities like the ones I got. And that was it.
So basically just like a Tinder for nerds.
hundreds.
Were you thinking about like monetization, the sustainability of the platform, or was like the impact really the focus there?
Wasn't thinking about monetization at all. It was the impact, right? Because again, you living in a bubble. I was quite all right in my personal capacity as an employed professional in the financial service industry, so I wasn't really worried about money. It was to say, how do you create a platform? How do you help? Whatever happens, happens. And that would have been like, I learned a lot from like the kind of companies I worked in. So I wasn't thinking about a monetization model at then. I just wanted to see the impact. And I was just taking it one step at a time, honestly.
Yeah. So how did that journey, play out until
Yeah.
Matric Live?
So what happened is that the platform itself started getting lots of downloads, right? But after the kids matched, there wasn't much engagement, right? And that was when you almost reach your cap in the product journey space. And I was like, flip, I never thought about what happens after they've matched and when they see the material. I never thought about that. But something very powerful happened. I think 2019, I then got interviewed about Sync on Radio 702, right? And after I got interviewed about it, I spoke about it. And that time on Sync, I was doing like design, but the actual implementation of the code, there was a developer in India through Fiverr who was deploying everything, and I would just pay because like I said, I'm not a developer. I'm more of a design and strategist on that front. And all of a sudden, because I posted on LinkedIn, it got a lot of engagement. And then my now business partner, Lesego, also posted. And he was showing the new interface on Matric Live. And the design and interface was just so slick. And somebody who was a common follower commented on both. So we showed up on each other's timeline. And I actually reached out to Lesego and I said, dude, can we have lunch at Investec the following day? He was like, okay, cool. We didn't know each other. He came, we had lunch, and the chemistry was just immediate. Like we were really focused on kind of having the same impact in life in South Africa, in the world. And there was just a natural synergy. Like we've known each other. He's from Bramfisher, I'm from Itsoseng. We are 11 years apart, but the vision and the synergy was just impeccable. And if you think about it, I have the strategic lens. He's a thoroughbred developer. The partnership just made sense. So by Feb 2020, we decided to just make it official.
Sure, man.
Yeah.
It's so rare when two people that are meant to build something together can actually meet each other. So shout out to LinkedIn.
Yeah. No, Reed deserves kudos.
No, people really
Yeah.
they underestimate like the
Yeah.
impact and things that can happen on that platform, because I think maybe it's a bit boring. But seeing people share the things that they're building can open up so many opportunities. What was it about, you and Lesego meeting that made you say, okay, this is the right way to do this? We are aligned on the impact that we want to have, but what were the values that you were looking for, or maybe the things that made you guys work the best way?
It starts with mutual respect, but also like there was a very understanding of each other. Like, yes, he's from Bramfisher, I'm from Itsoseng, but backgrounds are quite similar. It's the township. You are always like the kid that to a degree kind of stood out for their potential. Lesego started building tech products at 15 at home. Like it's one of those where and selfishly I'd say I saw a bit of myself in him, right? Because like I said, I'm 11 years older. And you can just spot the hunger and like the curiosity and the excitement about creating. I remember straight after talking to him, I called a good friend who's actually one of our angel investors now. And I was like, bro, there's this kid you need to meet. I even arranged time for us to meet and sit down. But some of these things that there's nothing you can document about what is it that works, but just vibes don't lie. It was just natural and organic. And it seemed the right thing to do, because also at the same time, he's an amazing builder, but he doesn't have the strategic direction. I had strategic vision and direction, but I couldn't keep on deploying and paying every time there's a deployment to a developer who I was apart with in India. So sometimes all of those moving pieces came together at the right time.
Sure. What makes a great business partner?
Um, I think you need to complement each other in a weird way. Like their strengths potentially have to be your weakness and vice versa. I find the fact that Lesego is so technical and he's so creative really great, because sometimes I can get lost in the wishy-washy aspect of things, and then he can practicalize it in the form of a product,
Mm.
right? It's that thing of like he's got that, and then on my end, builders are builders. They want to create the world, right? But I come in, let's say, even with a corporate kind of background, like timelines, what's achievable, what makes sense, risk mitigation. So I just think it's almost filling each other's gaps. And it's not to say that we don't have conflict. In fact, we have a lot of conflict because those two worlds will sometimes not even align. And I often sometimes even have to check myself and say, KG, maybe your risk consciousness is stepping in the way of the rate at which we can innovate. And again, even him, it's like, oh, flip, he had a point. This could have been very risky. So it's just bringing two worlds together. But I think also what's very important is the vision. There has to be a beacon. How we get there can take all sorts of routes. So we are aligned on the bigger picture. That's very important.
Sure. So, what did the initial version of Matric Live look like? But also, what did it do, and what problem was it trying to solve?
Um, you know, uh, Lesego always quotes Reid Hoffman when he talks about it. Like, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product,
You've launched too late.
you've launched too late. So the first product was quite mundane. It first used to be just past papers, right? And to an extensive degree, they were also quite static. It wasn't really as responsive, quite dynamic. That was the first part. The design wasn't really the best, but it was built for purpose because at that time as well, from a build perspective, you can understand it's not like Lesego is building for iOS. The operating system need to be affected. The machine he was working with needs to be thought about. So at first, it was just creating a library of past papers and learning material that he wished he had when he was in Matric. Right, that was the original plan, and it was to help other kids because he realized, because remember, schools differ. Some schools are more resourceful than others, so some kids don't necessarily fall short because they don't have this, but it's because they just didn't have the necessary support in school. And that's what he tried to centralize. That's the problem that he was trying to solve. That was the first version, and it did quite all right. It got lots of engagement. I mean, it was on about 15,000 users.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I've built something similar to
Yeah.
this, right? And this is way before
Yeah.
2019 or
Yeah.
2020. And it was so exciting for me to level the playing field almost, where
Yeah.
it was like it didn't make sense that there was people that had access to these resources,
Yeah.
and others that didn't. But then we were all writing the same exam,
Exactly.
which is like, oh no,
Yeah.
you went to school, you should be fine. You went through the curriculum, but like those extra layer of resources
Yeah.
give people an advantage.
Exactly.
What was the sort of early feedback from people when they were using this platform and saying, you know what, I'm studying for my final exams and I'm using this platform and I'm talking to other people who are studying similar subjects. Was there any feedback that you guys were getting from people that were like, hey, look, I'm using this and how I'm using it as well?
Yeah, I mean, the how even informed how the product developed, right? Because one, there was lots of good feedback on the app stores, right? Where kids were like, I love this, this is helpful. You would get random WhatsApps, right? I mean, teachers started reaching out to our generic mailbox saying, can I use this in my classes? And
Wow.
and then you are shocked. You're like, huh? What? Because as much as information is obvious to us, I mean, all these past papers, for example, are available on the DBE site. That means anybody can go get them, but there isn't a user journey that kind of curates that, right? the look and feel, the dynamism, the responsiveness. And that's what we actually saw, right? And as and when people were responding, it was to say, how do you make it sticky? And for example, that's what informed the learning pillar on Matric Live, because Matric Live now has 4 key pillars on one app, right? You've got learn, play, exam, and ask AI. On the learning piece now, you've got dynamic content on each of the subject where it's snackable. So you don't get a whole page or a whole textbook or whatever at once. You've got one, it's been even broken down at subtopic level. So you can open one thing and just learn about Euclidean geometry in that piece of it, and then carry on and even do a practice assessment on that piece alone. Under the learning pillar, it's dynamic. There's also even video content, right? It's quite playful from an interface perspective. Then what was also one of the major shifters, the playing piece. We created a feature where now if 2 kids have each other's each other's contact number, and they both have the app, obviously for security reasons, they must know each other. I can challenge you, Mash, to a best of 5 quiz on Matric Live. And when I win, I get points. When you lose points. There's an actual leaderboard, and when I beat you, I'm able to share the outcome of the thing to our social. So I can just share to WhatsApp or Twitter. Like, I just beat Mash in maths, right? There's that playfulness, and it's quite aggressive. The peak usage time of that feature is 9 p.m. to 2 a.m. So kids are up at night, like going
Just like,
at it.
hey man,
I need
when I feel like I can beat you in geometry. Let's go.
And that goes back to reinforcing the right behavior, right? And then the exam piece is like taking those same exams, but we actually created a dynamic question bank. So now you don't get a plain exam. What you get is that we've created a question bank that has over 10,000 previously asked exam questions. So at any point, you will get different questions that pull from that same library, and then you engage with it and unlock different levels up until it gathers enough data to personalize what you should be learning on. Now, again, it's starting to become needs-based, and as a learner, you feel like, oh, this understands me, and that's why we have the high engagement rates we have. And then the final piece is the Ask AI, where over 18 months, AI came up, and then everyone was like, how do we go fast? But we actually took time. We trained our own large language model, right? Based on the framework, because it's a South African curriculum. We trained it, we kept the framework, because if you ask, let's say, ChatGPT or DeepSeek what a certain learning concept is, you can get different answers. And sometimes the way it's answered, it doesn't even align with what's in the exam guidelines for your CAPS curriculum exam. So we're giving you the right info, but we're not necessarily helping you pass your metric in that sense. So we had to train it for that. And then learners can go there and have like an in-app study buddy,
Sure.
And giving that end-to-end faceted journey has been a 5-year long process of ongoing feedback from users and learners.
Yeah. You mentioned just like, Lesego being a builder and you being strategy oriented. So Lesego wants to build as much as he possibly can and like make sure everything works so that everyone can have access to everything that he might have in his mind for what solves the problem.
Yeah.
How do you partner with users in order to decide what is right to build and what is the most important thing that would drive the best impact?
The best way, for example, we've kind of integrated with Zendesk, right? So we've got ongoing feedback loop where people are either reporting errors or giving feedback, right? It's a matter of just analyzing which one is more urgent, but also which one makes sense and aligns with the long-term strategic direction. You may want to build this, but if you've got 300 learners saying, Flip, I need an explanation of Othello, you kind of have to prioritize bringing that if it's missing, So it's a matter of paying attention to the data. But also like we are still in that, I give the team a lot of free rein. Creators are creators, So I often say, gents, break the system, just build. And the guys are amazing. Like you can have 3 days where they just go ham, or even new laptops can change them, right? When they got the new MacBook Pros with the M4 chips, they went in build mode. So sometimes it's not even because sometimes users don't even know what they need. And then all of a sudden, this is when Lesego came with this responsive exam simulator. He built the underlying framework and GPT of the large language model in 72 hours, which was a day after Sam Altman announced the GPT store. And it just so happened to coincide with us getting him an M2 chip. He was so shocked by the processing speed. So that you can't really regulate.
Yeah.
You know, and you want to keep that kind of excitement about building in the team and balance it with taking care of business as usual.
Yeah. So part of this is also just, making the past papers not just, what they already are, which is static PDFs where people can just go and answer the questions. You guys took it one step further by adding that dynamic element with the learn sort of pillar, where you're breaking down these past papers to subjects, to topics, very granular.
Yeah.
What sort of behavior were you guys incentivizing by breaking it down in that way? But also, what sort of results were you seeing from the people that were using that feature early on?
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it is, which was a big breakthrough in our time, is when COVID really hit, there wasn't really much of a response in the system, right? And that's when we saw Matric Live going from 15,000 users to 631,000 users, right?
Sure.
And there was a realization that we need to leverage this even at government level. So by virtue of partnering with the National Education Collaboration Trust in 2020, they brought in subject specialists. I'm not going to come here and act like we knew what to do, And when they were reviewing the journey at that time, they started recommending breaking it down at that level, because that's how it's broken down in the annual teaching plan by the department either way. That's how it's broken down in exam guidelines. And that is what teachers follow to see how far their classes are. So from an assessment perspective about the proficiency of people, you need those indicators even at the database level. So when you start getting that kind of input from now the field experts, it just made that much more sense. And when we broke it down that way, we actually saw engagement increase, because initially, if it's just everything, man, I just want that segment. I don't want the whole thing. It's very easy to lose someone,
Yeah.
It's almost like it was bringing that in-app GPT engagement piece before GPT engagement within an app, So when it starts getting broken down as well, it makes it easy to find what you're looking for, because we then even built in a search engine within the app. Now you can go to learn and just search trigonometry, and then it will take you to the section that you need to go to. So now what that means is that quicker to what I need to get to so that I can address, and you're giving the person back time, and you kind of saving them from decision-making paralysis. So that increases engagement, and that's what we saw. As and when we started making it micro, because people have short attention spans in this age, they've got lots of options. Engagement rates went through the roof, So and to say that there was an incentive or there was a behavior we wanted to see before we did that, no, there wasn't. It was just the right partnership, and a lot of people give government a lot of flack, but that's an example of partnership between public and private working out for the benefit of the nation.
Yeah.
Because that's where we got our first big paycheck.
Sure. I was about to ask, how important to have partnerships with the right people who understand the space, expert level, to say, oh, you guys are already doing something amazing. What we want to do is be, joined with you at some level in order to drive the impact that we also believe in. How are you guys making decisions on who the right partners were, but also how important has partnership been for your journey?
Man, we are not here without partners. It's, when you even ask yourself, what did we do right? Because some of them, you don't know how it happened. But it's also a nature of when they say you have to be on the dance floor, right? There were a lot of things wrong and not in place in 2020 when we were viral. But by virtue of being viral, it made it impossible to ignore us. And what that brought was the right partners. Also lots of tough lessons, but the right partners. And by landing that first partnership with the National Education Collaboration Trust and having subject specialists review your content, now all of a sudden you've got almost a tacit stamp of approval when SABC is advertising Woza Matrix and Matric Live is there. We were part of the remote and digital learning response by the government. Now, all of a sudden, when a big corporate sees that, they're interested. That's how we land our first corporate client. They're saying, can we distribute our literacy content in your platform? Okay, yes. Now you even learn how to do business with big corporate and you learn their procurement process and timelines, right? We didn't walk in saying, here's a roadmap. These are the people we have to partner with. A big part of it was shooting your shot, building what you believe is right, and then the universe responding. And we've been very fortunate to partner with government, private, but if there's one thing that we all pick up, even in our first engagements with all the strategic parties we've dealt with, we all love education. We all believe in the prosperity of this country. We believe in the potential of the youth. As much as it can say whatever about literacy, like South Africa is a wash of talent and potential. And we all just want to unlock it. So that piece has just been, I'd say, more allowing the universe to respond to what you're doing. There wasn't a bedded roadmap.
Sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate you actually acknowledging that. Sometimes I think founders go, oh no, it was me. I'm Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
You speak about this viral moment in 2020, going from 15,000 users to 600,000.
Yeah.
And, that's a massive acceleration for, overnight almost. Those viral moments happen to a lot of platforms and businesses where something happens, maybe something you don't control, maybe even a crisis, puts you in a position to drive way bigger impact at scale. Were you guys prepared for what happened in that moment? But also, how did the business need to change to adapt to that reality?
Great question. One, were we prepared? No. We were still on Hostinja, the cheapest plan, right? I remember the day vividly. Lesego was calling me endlessly, and I was like, I can't ignore this call because I was still on a Teams call in my previous job, and then I had to pause, and then I answered, and then I looked at it, and he was like, dude, the server has crashed. I'm like, what? We are number one on Android.
On the Play Store?
On the Play Store. We're number one. The server has crashed. And he had to send me the link. I had to log in real time, go to Hostinja and change our plan immediately. I went there using my own personal card, change, and then once that he had to refresh on the other end and the app was back up. That's like on the infrastructure side. The next piece, the business itself. That time it's Lesego and I have a full-time job. We were not prepared at all. In fact, the platform got bigger than we knew what to do, right? And we almost had to retrofit a business model into the virality of Matric Live. And that was a lot of learning and unlearning, right? Understanding what kind of makes money, what takes money. And as and when you're getting partnership proposals, you're now reviewing what works, what doesn't. But also I had to think objectively and say, we can't keep this up, approach people I know that are friends and say, gents, are you willing to be angel investors? This is where we are. And we were fortunate enough to get that. And that enabled us to get a better machines, and then get two other, gents that were at We Think Code with Lesego. Now we are starting to think strategically. And then as and when you grow, now you need to think about your SARS filing, your accounting, reporting, the not so fancy part. And that's where honestly having come from corporate helped. A big part of me understood the governance aspect, and also that's when even Popia was becoming really intense. So I became finicky about even our data and how we engage. So I even said no to certain deals that were coming, but it was going to exploit the data of minors, so that's part of that. And we just started tinkering, and I won't lie, it's been a lengthy 4.5 process of unlocking our true commercial potential. It's not overnight. And we've actually survived going viral, having a dip, coming back, having a plateau, getting into an accelerator, going viral, coming back. And now we even have like a proper sound business model going. We know where our commercial levers are, and we have a strategic framework of how we can grow.
Yeah. You know, it's famously very difficult to monetize in education.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, EdTech just has this
Yeah,
reputation
it
of
does.
being, oh no, you have money, you want to help people.
Yeah.
You should just be able to help people. What was that initial business model at the very beginning? And, you know, how were you guys trying to balance that need to make the business sustainable, but also still driving the same impact and maybe even more?
Yeah. I mean, first things first, like to explain, and I actually understand it from a psychological aspect, why EdTech is so unpopularly tough to monetize. Education is one of the only things in life where you don't see an immediate return on investment. You know, we could argue we are only seeing the return on investment of my scholarship at 12 years old now. So, and people love to see something, getting something back. I'm paying, I'm getting food, I'm eating, I'm getting satiated. You know, so people know its value, but because of how long-winded its actual impact is, it makes it a nice, but people are thinking money now, how soon? That's which I understand, and I've become very forgiving of pessimists on that front. But reality is you don't need to wait for the landscape to be ripe to do something about it, because reality is if we don't do something about it, we have a humanitarian crisis. We can't go on at the rate that we are. You know, we are an unequal society as is. You know, so something needs to be done. And initially, we used to charge, we started, when we were viral, we tried to bring a subscription, right? And what we saw was that 60% of our active users were kids from no fee paying schools. And we started getting 1-star ratings for charging kids.
Sure.
Tough lesson, you know. So we said, okay, free again. I mean, we went viral because we were the coolest free app, I guess, you know, so nature of that. And then it was to say, how do we get over the vanity metrics? We're a cool app. We've won breakthrough solution at MTN App of the Year, but like, it's now time to think about the business. So once we got over even our own cool aid kind of thing, it was to say, how do you think? And I think we started seeing it by what people were willing to pay for from a corporate level. So for example, we became an assessment partner for the Department of Basic Education. There was no learner info being disclosed. All they needed to know, because kids were not in school, was what are the signs across each subject in each province, so that they can notify their regional heads. That monthly report showed the statistical value, the data science as value of what we were doing. So they were able to put strategies on the ground based on the reports that they were getting from us. So that's when all of a sudden data science as a service started showing itself. And then a big financial service provider said, we've got curriculum aligned content that's been approved by the Department of Education. We needed to get to as many learners as possible in 11 official languages. We don't have the learner engagement platform that you kind of have. Are you willing to ingest it? We will pay for the devs. We will pay for the monthly cost of having it and read the report. Okay, recurring revenue, is that you? You know?
Yeah.
And then that shows. And then now you start seeing that's replicable with corporates. And then all of a sudden we start getting requests from schools and teachers saying, can I use the question bank that's on the exam simulator to test my own kids? That's how we built a standalone platform called Assessor, right? That's being bought directly by schools, and they can leverage the same question bank and set up their own curated exams and see live dashboards of where their kids sit. Now you can all of a sudden do benchline assessments across 11 subjects real time, right? So almost an independent product was born out of Matric Live's assessment piece, exam piece. And that is a completely new revenue model, IP protected, a standalone product that is now selling on a B2B level via platform as a service. So it's being open to that and being teachable. So these three revenue streams that I've spoken about have enabled us to keep the core of the platform free.
Yeah. And you know, when you're figuring these things out, right? What are the challenges that you're seeing around building in EdTech, right? Like you guys have gone through the full journey. Well,
Yeah.
not full journey. I think you guys have an incredible journey ahead of you for the impact you're still yet to drive. But what are the challenges in building in EdTech, especially in Africa, where maybe before this virality, a lot of people were maybe pessimistic about the tools that they could use to improve themselves from an education level, but also just the pessimism of people who want to invest in something like this as a tech business?
I mean, what I've seen is that before we look at product and business, there's a mindset shift needed. I often say, you know, KPIs drive behavior. If you are going to incentivize somebody on a return within the next 12 months, it's going to be extremely tough for them to take a punt on an EdTech. So we can't blame people for seeing the lack of funds when the levers are different. So we need to start thinking about the time horizons on investment instruments that have education in their asset classes. You can balance an asset class, right? You can have aggressive ones that make up for the time you lose, and then always make sure you have education for the long-winded process. That's one thing. But it's a mindset shift. People need to even think about beyond their tenure. What does this portfolio look like after I'm done? So there's that need. And then on the entrepreneur side, there's a recalibration of expectation that's needed. Virality does not mean money. And also, like, we are too obsessed about models that work in the West. There's a lot of good that's out there, a lot of things that we can emulate. But when you are in this market, which doesn't have the risk appetite that's needed and which doesn't have the liquidity that's needed, nor the economic growth, maybe, just maybe, your business running cap needs to be more like a camel. You know, work for the dry days, still be ambitious, but always make sure that you can survive Donald Trump closing the tap on US aid if you were expecting grant funding. Right? I don't care what people say. They can say it's a lack of ambition. No, I'm saying it's understanding your market. Too many entities are going under, not because there's no potential, simply because of a lack of understanding of the market that you're in. You know, you can make, I mean, we've just ended this past financial year on a net profit, which is unheard of, right? Especially in the space. There's nothing amazing that we're doing. To a degree, yes, we're doing a lot, but it was just also being pragmatic in the approaches. You know, understand that it's like to say, yes, it would be great to have a team of 30 overnight. Think, look what you have, what you're working with. What are your sources of money? How sustainable are they? What are the odds of renewing? If they aren't renewing, what other sources do you create? So we actually need to put business caps on rather than cool tech founder caps on. You know, forget about the glitz and glam. Focus on the basics. What's the balance sheet saying? What's the income statement saying? What are the sources? What are the terms aligned to any source of money I get? Don't go and promise a fund 40% return in the next 4 years or 5 years when you know, like, the industry you are in and you know the funding appetite is weak. Because all of a sudden you'll wake up and point your fingers at the funder, forgetting that you said yes to those very same targets. So there's a part where we kind of, even ourselves, we need to look at ourselves and say, what makes sense? Even if you may be called unambitious, if the business and the balance sheet is doing the right thing, maybe something is working.
Yeah. How do you guys measure impact?
So that's one of my favorite pieces. My background helped a lot, right? Obviously coming from a banking background, I was exposed to really amazing professionals. I mean, there's a lady at InvestTech called Maxine Gray. There's the likes of Barry Shamley, who heads up the Sustainable Equity Fund. Like, there's lots of learning material in that place about sustainability, right? And for me, that's when it was looking at the fact sheet when I saw certain impact measurement frameworks that I input. And I went on a rabbit hole to research it myself, and I came across the Iris Plus framework. And a big part of it, you can measure if the tables are there on your database. And yeah, we've configured our back end to also have that piece on it.
Please go through this impact measure.
Look, when you Google the Global Impact Measurement Framework, it's even available open source on CFA Sustainability. There are certain things that you look at, right? For example, if a kid is in a quintile 1 or 2 school, it's a poor school, right? So the hypothesis is that if that kid ends up with a C or a B, the societal impact is potentially, the social return on investment is potentially higher than a kid in a quintile 5 school finishing with a B plus or an A. Because when that kid makes it, an entire family makes it. Our situation. So there's a framework around it for all the different SDGs, and you can go and study the inputs.
Yeah.
And those inputs, a fair amount of them you can measure.
Is this the intention that you guys had at the beginning, or something that needed to develop over time, where you're going, okay, if we can get a kid who is doing, maybe a D at maybe in grade 11, and they, use the platform and they're now improving to C or B levels, that means they get into a better course. That means they graduate maybe even better in that sense. And then that impact sort of goes back into that community, into that family. Was that the intention when you guys started? Or is that something that really needed to develop over time and for you guys to understand and measure as well?
It was a bit of both, because the reality is we lived it, right? My mom was a cashier. My dad worked in the mines. I went to a no-fee paying primary school, right? And just by virtue of the things that happened in my life, it has impacted more than just me. You can see how it. So I that was the whole ideation of sync. It was to say, flip, if more kids from here get opportunities like this. But I never knew how to articulate it and visualize it. And then all of a sudden life happens, man. And that's why everything happens for a reason. I was in corporate for a reason, right? I was in the department I was in for a reason. And seeing that fund manifest as a person working in that department created an aha moment for me when I put my business cap on. To say, oh, there we go. But seeing it is one thing. Operationalizing it and making it possible is another. Because now I needed to make it understandable to my team why we should prioritize it.
Yeah. You guys you have a team already. And what were the things that you were looking for in the guys that you were hiring in the business for them to have the same level of dedication, the same level of commitment to driving impact, but also building a sustainable business?
One of my favorite books is The Hard Things About Hard Things, Ben Horowitz.
Of course.
And it's all about business is war, man. And when I read the whole concept of wartime CEOs and going to war, when you realize how competitive everything is, that's grit trumps talent, at least in our team. That resilience, that healthy chip on the shoulder. A lot of us, especially because of our background, just have those innate unfinished beefs, whether you were bullied or you were made fun of, or there's that, I'm gonna get you.
Yeah. I like the sound.
Yeah. There's, as much as we work, we smile, there's a healthy nastiness to it. when we see something cool happening, we will give kudos, but we will be like, how do we go for that? You know, like obviously staying within the picture, but it's an extremely competitive team. You won't say when you're around, like from a distance, but like, yeah, it's a very competitive team.
Yeah. You guys have won most recently,
Yeah.
and this is when I spent some time with Lesego last year with the FNB App of the Year Awards, right? And you walked away with 4 awards? 3, 4? Oh, the man can't even. Too many. Hey, we are winning.
Yeah.
You know, I've been a judge for the awards for about 4 years or so.
Yeah.
And every year you see something that you know is not just solving a problem, but will drive impact and marry the sort of impact with sustainability and the actual business being healthy as well. And you guys are one of those rare things where it's like, oh, I saw you win the first award, which was, I think, South African App of the Year award.
It was education
Education first.
Yeah.
And then there was another one, and then there
Breakthrough,
was the 3.
Yeah.
And it's like, you guys have had these points of success where people acknowledge the work
Yeah.
that you've done, but also say, you know, this is a uniquely South African thing that is solving a uniquely South African problem. What do awards mean to you guys? But also specifically, how's the FNB App of the Awards really impacted you guys?
I mean, to start off with, you know, like every time we didn't win the prize we got last year, as much as it was good kudos, like I said again, we're competitive. We were like, you know, like imagine we are the size we are, but we hated like coming second to losing to easy equities, or is it bottles, or is it whatever. Like these things mattered. Like, so there's a competitive side to it. So one, winning it was vindication, right? Of it can be done in a relatively privately funded, part bootstrapped manner by South Africans who are from townships who went to Quintile 1 schools. There's a big message that it leaves there. It sets the precedent of what's possible, because a lot of kids tend to think that by virtue of being somewhere or starting somewhere, you are already capped. You should see the response on kids when we go to high schools and we are demoing or we are deploying our tech with the schools. When they find out that we are the co-founders of Matric Life, they light up because they expect it to be something cosmic or whatever, you know? And it's the relatability to hear Kagisho just talking slang in Setswana, and you're like, but that's the co-founder.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, because there's this thing of it should be Zuckerberg or Elon, I don't know. You know, so breaking that, demystifying that is extremely important. But like I said again, it's vindication, because I mean, like, bro, there was Checkers, there was Bash, there was Take a Lot. You know, to trump that for me is even innately as a team to say it's possible. Now let's think bigger. You know, it's this has been amazing, you know, and we just happen to be FNB business bankers either way, and like connecting the dots, it was like, oh snap. And also there was a piece that was emotional, because we've been through a lot as a team. I mean, we packed our bags, we moved to Cape Town. The team didn't know anyone there. We had a lot of tough moments. There were times where invoices were slow and I had to dig into my own pocket. And you stop and you're like, yeah, it was worth it.
Yeah.
You know, there's that piece where you just sit and you like flip, the glasses become foggy. You're like, actually, like, because I stepped away from a great position in corporate, you know, and I mean, Bongani was at BBD, you know, like we had great stuff. And for us, it's saying it's possible, but also it's saying it's time to like now shift the gears and do much more.
What does success look like for you guys in the future?
Having more kids being able to point back to their exposure to either us or our platform directly or indirectly, and seeing it as a pivotal moment in their lives. That's the superficial aspect of it. And just to be frank, like I said again, we come from tough situations. To see ourselves being able to liberate our bloodlines economically, all of us as the people that started this business, is still like, I don't want to shy away from it. We have to make it. You know, we have to make it. We have to break generational curses or holdbacks. We have to break the threshold, because if I do it, all of a sudden my nephew knows that it's possible.
Sure.
You know, and yeah, it's that.
Changing the face of builders from Steve Jobs, from Mark Zuckerberg
Yeah.
to Lesego and Kagisho.
Yeah, it's,
Really driving meaningful impact.
yeah.
It's incredible, man, to see the journey that you've gone through, whether it was through the FNB App of the Year awards, but also the viral moment to building a sustainable business. It's an incredible thing. What is one thing that you know now that you wish you knew at the beginning of your journey?
And I've tweeted this and you've retweeted it before, but I live by it. Nothing. You can do all the prep that you want, all the research you want. Eventually, you will have to start. Nothing will prepare you for what you're embarking on or what you want to do better than throwing yourself in it and immersing yourself in it. And I sometimes feel like maybe I held back too long. I am where I am now. But like that, it's like just know. You know, nothing will. So if I wish I knew that, like, it doesn't matter how much prep I do, the curveballs will be there, like the unanticipated setbacks will be there. Just do it. And the earlier you know that, the earlier you can pay your school fees, the more XP you have, and the likelier you are to be better suited to navigate.
Sure. What does the future of the platform look like?
Be seeing it as initially a Pan-African thing. It may have different names, directly or indirectly relicensing. There are 108 million kids in sub-Saharan Africa who are out of school and should be in school, in secondary alone. We want to impact that. We want to transcend just high school education. We want to create lifelong learners and see how it can adapt into the unconventional learning space as well. Effectively, we just want to be like a vortex of opportunity for those who wouldn't traditionally have access to it.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it, Maji.